Hello and welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch with your YouTube friend Brad. Hello, thank you, subscribe, comment all the time, pass these along. As here on ST Weekly, we do Sports Talk Weekly, we do Stern Talk Weekly, and there will be more Stern guests coming up. I hope you've been enjoying the interviews here if you're just coming to the channel, but I'll be getting more of those coming here soon. Have a few people worked up that are ready to join, and we're just getting ready to tape them, but I wanted to get a new episode out, so this one is one of the rare times you hear Bob Costas mention Howard Stern, and I thought that was interesting that he had a comment on him. So here's some of my fun talks with Bob. There's a lot of fun things here from his career, and I hope you enjoy it. Of course, brought to you by Masses Restaurants in St. Louis, stlmasses.com. Go there, look at the menus. If you're driving through St. Louis, you can go get some pasta, get beef pepe, my favorite. Go to Masses Restaurants in St. Louis. But let's have some fun here with Bob over some of the times that I've interviewed him and listen to some of his comments about just everything, sports and beyond. But I grew up literally taping Dave Letterman shows, watching him the next day. Obviously, I listened to you here at KMOX and then watched you on NBC. But that night also involved, so I have a Mount Rushmore, and this is a weird one, Bob. You'll probably find this hilarious. My Mount Rushmore of basically favorite broadcasters or people that I am really honored to talk to, so this is obviously a thrill. It's you, it's Dave Letterman, it's Vince McMahon, and it's Howard Stern. That's my Mount Rushmore of people that I'm very interested in broadcasting.
Well, I'm happy to be grouped with David Letterman.
But you had Vince McMahon on that one. Way back then, and then who knew you guys would make history some 15 years later. I've always wanted to ask you about that interview. I know you've talked about it before. Did you realize he was ready to go into character? Because he's sort of in character on your HBO interview where it gets contentious. It was in the middle of the time where he had basically just won the wrestling war where he took over WCW, but he was doing a tawdry storyline with Trish Stratus, and you sort of started questioning him, and he kind of came at you. Tell me a little bit about that night. Were you prepared for him to be that way? Did you realize somewhere in there that, okay, we're getting the Vince McMahon character and not the real Vince McMahon, or did you think this is Vince McMahon?
Well, I think there's substantial overlap between the real Vince McMahon and the Vince McMahon character, but what you left out there was that was when the XFL was on the air on NBC. We never would have had him on were it not for the XFL, which at least was trying to be passed off as some sort of legitimate sports venture, and it was on a mainstream network, and that was really what brought Vince McMahon to HBO. I told him in the green room before the program started, because I thought it was only fair, I said, look, I'm going to ask you some straightforward but perhaps tough questions. And certainly he was not used to being interviewed in that way. I mean, everything is staged when it comes to wrestling stuff. And I asked him perfectly legitimate questions. I wouldn't change a bit of it. And he went off. Now, it was HBO, so none of it was edited or censored. And there were no commercials. And it was live. So it was live. It was scheduled for like 15 minutes. But people know when it's good television, so the producers are telling me in my ear, keep on going. And I think it went like 26, 27 minutes, and much of it was unrelenting tension. And people asked me afterwards, given, what his history is, and the veins in his neck were bulging out, and he'd turned crimson red, and he was jabbing a finger at me, if I thought that he might slug me or whatever. And I actually never thought that. I thought he was trying in some sense to intimidate me. And when that wasn't successful, when I wasn't thrown off, I think that made him only angrier still.
How did you keep your cool? And because it did just it blasted out of nowhere, and I mean it really is one of, I think, your greatest moments, because you're just, go ahead, Vince, do your thing, jump, get off. He came up at his chair and he started waving his finger at you, and you just said, well, I'll just take this.
Yeah, I think actually what set him off was when he came forward, and I realized, what am I going to do? If I go back, he can still come and get me if he wants to. If I go back in my seat, what does that prove? So the best body language, he came forward and I came forward. And then we were almost chin to chin, and I smiled at him. And I think that really set him off.
You did have him on again, though, and it was much easier time. It was after the XFL had gone away. Do you have any sort of relationship with him? And is it weird that you've done some of the greatest interviews of all time of anybody who does interviews, yet many people will remember this one more than any of them that you've done?
I don't know if they remember it more, but it's among the handful, I guess, that they remember most. What strikes me as odd, there was a documentary on ESPN called This Was the XFL. And some people took from that the XFL was this lovely sort of pie-in-the-sky dream. And what a shame that the dreamer Vince McMahon had his hopes dashed. And if only the world weren't aligned unfairly against him, it would have turned out just wonderfully. The product was crap. It was terrible. The football wasn't very good. I feel I don't want to say anything negative about the coaches and the players. They were just chasing a dream, so that's fine. I didn't have any criticism of them, but the quality of the football was not very good, and the presentation was idiotic. It would have caused any reasonably bright 12-year-old to roll his or her eyes. It was trash. It was tawdry. And I called it that way from the beginning, before they ever played a game. I think I was on with Conan O'Brien. I said something to the effect of, I've been saying all along, when will someone combine low-level high school football with the atmosphere of a tawdry strip club? And finally, Vince McMahon has taken my idea and run with it. So I don't understand all these people who think I was unfair to Vince McMahon or that I was some sort of get-off-my-lawn guy. How can you be right about every aspect of it? I was right about every aspect of it from the start. And somehow, at least in the world of those who follow the WWE and think Vince McMahon can do no wrong, I'm the villain in this. I don't know. There wasn't much to recommend the XFL. Now, the new version of it, I keep an open mind.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I know I said the Mount Rushmore comment. I'm interested in him as the P.T. Barnum of our time more than anything. I'm not a huge fan, but I do find him crazy that way.
Yeah, that's apt.
Apt. One other night I wanted to ask you about is you were on the NBC broadcast of the NBA Finals the week of the O.J.Simpson car chase, the whole week of that,
yes.
And you worked with O.J. What was that night like for you and that week? Someone that you had spent a lot of time with on the set, at the desk of NBC, NFL Live. Surreal, what would you call it, and as you look back at it some 25 years ago?
Well, my first thought when the murders happened on a Sunday night and then word of it reached across the country by Monday morning, my first thought, not knowing any of the particulars, was, oh my God, what a horrible thing to have happen to O.J. and his family. And then as details came our way in the next few days, then you had to grapple with the distinct possibility that he was involved, that there was criminal activity on O.J.'s part. And then by Friday, when the Bronco chase happens, during Game 5 of the NBA Finals between the Knicks and the Rockets at Madison Square Garden, by then, even if you wanted to give O.J. the benefit of the doubt, you had to say to yourself rationally, an innocent man, especially an innocent man with resources and wherewithal and goodwill with the public, doesn't run. What is he doing? Gun to his head, sack of cash, passport, maybe making a run for it. None of that makes very much sense. So by then, by that Friday, 5 days or whatever after the murders, I'm beginning to think there's at least a distinct possibility, and I wasn't alone in thinking this, that O.J. committed the murders or was involved in the murders. Now, the game is going on, and the nation is transfixed by this Bronco chase. It's a low-speed chase along the 405 in Southern California, but the other networks are going to it completely. We have to make a decision. It's not my decision to make. It's Dick Ebersol's as the head of NBC Sports. What are we going to do? So some of the time we split the screen, which must have been odd. Elijah and Ewing on one side and the Bronco on the other. And then there were times when I had to transition between Marv Albert, who was calling the game, and Tom Brokaw, who was across the street in the studio at 30 Rock, who was updating us on what was happening. So it was kind of a balancing act in terms of tone, because some sort of Shakespearean tragedy was playing out on the one hand, but then when you went back to Madison Square Garden, there's raucous cheering and an intense game going on. So it was surreal in that respect.
And what was your relationship with him? I mean, did you have sort of a weird feel because you knew him well, or was it more of just I work with that guy?
No, I knew O.J. pretty well, although we all have to say, or almost all of us have to say, we didn't know him nearly as well as we thought. And that's not just with regard to the murders. I did not know of the history of domestic disputes and domestic violence with Nicole. I didn't know any of that. There had been one episode that was known publicly, and they put on a unified front, he and Nicole, saying, it's just a little dispute on New Year's Eve that got out of hand. And I guess we all accepted that, but I was not aware of a list of such incidents until all that stuff came out after the murders. But I knew O.J., at least superficially, I thought, reasonably well. We played golf together. We went to dinner many times. We were on the set together for, I think it was 4 years. He was always good company. You could joke around with him. He was the kind of guy who remembered the name of the kid who brought the coffee and the newspapers in the morning when you first arrived on the set. So I had favorable feelings about O.J.
Not so anymore. I guess you don't keep in touch, I guess.
No, the last time I saw him was in November of 1994. He had asked to see me, and he was in the L.A. County Jail. So I went, and A.C. Cowlings was there. The guy who was driving the Bronco, his former Bills teammate, and Robert Kardashian, who has since passed away, who was part of his defense team, actually picked me up at my hotel in Los Angeles and drove me over to the L.A. County Jail that night. And so I did visit with O.J. along with A.C. and Robert Kardashian, and it's the last time I've seen him or spoken to him.
This does give me a chance to kind of scroll through some of the classic. I always like to check on your career and do some fun. I've never asked you about Basketball, a fine film from the creators of South Park. I'm curious when you see the script and what you're going to say. I guess, first of all, just being contacted has got to be obviously a thrill no matter what, right? But tell me a little bit about how those guys contact you, and then you see the script, and then the what you're going to say to Al Michaels. You have a famous line in there. Just give me a little bit about just that, getting that role, and then looking it over and saying, oh, I'm going to say that? All right, sounds good.
Well, it wasn't the South Park guys who contacted me, although I was aware that they were involved with the script and they are the stars of the movie. It was the Zucker brothers who had done the Naked Gun series and Airplane. Great, good fun. I loved those films. And the South Park guys also obviously had great standing. My agent read the script. They sent it to him. And he said, if I were you, I wouldn't do this. And I'm thinking, well, he was an older guy and maybe his sensibility about this isn't the same as me. And these, after all, the guys who did Airplane and the Naked Gun and the South Park guys, it has to be okay. So I agreed to do it. Plus, I didn't know that down the road I'd do plenty with Al Michaels, but Al and I were friends, but we had never done anything on air or on film together. So that was part of the incentive too. And we got there, and it was the last day of filming. We didn't see or cross paths with anyone else who's in the film. And there's a cavalcade of sports figures as well as actors like Ernest Borgnine and Robert Vaughn and Yasmin Bleeth and the South Park guys, but a whole bunch of sports people are in it. Kareem's in it, Reggie Jackson's in it, a zillion sports announcers are in it. But Al and I just shot our scenes alone. And in the first hour or two, we're thinking, this stuff is pretty funny, in kind of a lowbrow way, but it's pretty funny. And then they asked me to do the line, which is infamous. And my first thing was, I've done everything you've asked. I can't do this. Come on, I can't do this. And they said, just do it for us. The crew will get a kick out of it. It's been a long series of weeks of shooting. Just do it for us. And if it doesn't work, we won't use it. Well, in their minds, not only did it work and it's in the film, but they used it in their commercials for the film and in the trailer that people saw in movie theaters when they went to see other movies. And in fact, it comes out at about the same time as Saving Private Ryan. So I am at the Kirkwood Theater with some friends to see Saving Private Ryan. And now the previews of other films come on. And one of them is Basketball, which had a very, very short run in theaters. It was on DVD or whatever the technology was in the late 90s in about a month. But in any case, the preview comes on. And some people in the theater must have seen me in the lobby as I was getting my ticket. And I'm sitting like sort of down to the right, maybe 10 rows from the front. And from the back of the theater in the dark comes one word, Bob. Like how could you? Bob. So even then I realized how ridiculous it was. And now it shows up now and then on somewhere on cable TV. And I found out that for my son's generation and for others, it really is a kind of same thing as with Pootie Tang, which I was also in with Chris Rock and Wanda Sykes and others. And at first you say, what am I getting into? But then a decade or more down the road, you say, yeah, people got a kick out of it. No harm done.
And you're in the Screen Actors Guild then, right? You get DVDs sent to you for Oscars, no?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think I'm full-fledged enough. I have an interesting filmography. I was in the paper in a scene with Glenn Close and Jason Robards, Ron Howard's film.
I love that movie, and you can never find it like streaming anywhere. I really do. Yeah. I love Michael Keaton's in that, I think, too, right?
Michael Keaton, pre-Superman, I think. Yeah. Or maybe it was after Superman. I don't remember. But anyway, I don't mean Superman. I meant Batman. It was, I think, 1994. Couple more minutes. The other big thing you did, and I was just curious, because I would assume you hosted the pregame show for Cheers live as they're in the bar, I think the Bull and Finch bar in Boston, right? I think it was live after or before. Yeah, well, the pregame we shot on the Cheers set in Los Angeles a few weeks before. And then when the show aired, the cast had been brought to Boston for their post party at the original Cheers bar. And by the time that moment arrived, they were way into their cups. And it was my job to move Ted Danson and Rhea Perlman and everybody else through. Woody Harrelson, I guess, was part of it. Shelley Long, to kind of move them through the bar and introduce them to these various people, most of whom were sports stars. John Havlicek and Jim Rice was there. All these Boston sports personalities were there. But by then, the Cheers cast was, how shall we put this, somewhat distracted.
I remember. It probably has to be like a sober guy going to a drunk party and seeing every... But I was curious, I guess you didn't really... Did you get to have fun with that, or was it more of a job? Because I would assume trying to do that, it's more of a job than actually having fun.
Well, now that I think of it, Leno was also there. So it was me and Leno. I guess what it became, now that I think of it...
They did the night show after live.
Yeah, the special took up 2 hours of prime time. Then you had the local news on all the affiliates. And then the Tonight Show came from the bar in Boston. So Leno was actually the guy presiding over it. But they had me there because Jay, even though he's from Boston, is not that avid of a sports fan. So I was there kind of as a safety net, just in case he didn't recognize Cam Neely or something. So it was me and Jay, but when it turned to the sports part, it was more me, and I helped them navigate it. And yes, when it was over, when the show was over an hour later, then we all got into, relatively speaking, a party mode, but not as deep into it as the Cheers cast was.
Wanted to ask you about your show later. I think that show, you see it on YouTube. I used to watch it as a kid. You said 36 years at KMOX, so I was about 3 when you started there. Or at NBC, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were at KMOX way earlier, but you're still doing your thing, which is awesome. But later was a show where you did interviews, and you did Gary Shandling, you did David Letterman, you did Elie Wiesel. I remember you mentioning him before.
Right.
But the entertainment, I think when I look at it, first of all, I'm curious if you would even be able to do a show like that every night due to the entertainment not being what it was back then, because I think you name these people off.
I'm not saying this just to be nice. These are among the most perceptive questions that I've received, all of them, including this one. So I said to someone the other day, someone at NBC, they said, would you ever consider coming back and doing a show like Later, even if it was only weekly as opposed to nightly? And I said, I don't think I could do it as well, because when I was in my late 30s through my mid 40s, I was kind of in the center cut of the cultural climate in America, at least for a large portion of the audience. I could brush up on Billy Joel or Bruce Springsteen or Ray Charles or Smokey Robinson, but I didn't need to turn to some production assistant and say, hey, who is that? Or tell me a little bit more about Taylor Swift. It isn't that I don't know who Taylor Swift is, it just isn't as much a part of the life that I've led. If you said to me you're going to interview Robert De Niro tomorrow, I think I could ace it just the way I hope I would have aced it in 1990. If you said you're going to interview Zac Efron tomorrow, who I met at the Olympics, and he seems like a really nice guy, I don't know if I'm the right guy to do it. There comes a time when it's kind of your time. And then there comes a time when you transition into other things. I think I can still call baseball for a long time. I think I can still cover sports issues for a long time. And there might be a handful of cultural figures that people would want to see me talk with. But on a nightly basis, I don't think that it's as much in my wheelhouse as it used to be. But, and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, what you referenced talking about YouTube, when someone who had been on Later passes away, it seems as if some portion or all of that interview shows up on YouTube. Somebody has saved it. Just yesterday, Gene Wilder died. Gene Wilder did an interview on Later that was so funny, so revealing, and yet so sweet and touching that you got a real sense of who Gene Wilder was, while also seeing clips from the producers and Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles and hearing stories about Gilda Radner. When Glenn Frey died, I hadn't seen it, and someone told me, hey, look, it's on YouTube. I hadn't seen it in more than 20 years. But yeah, that was a pretty revealing interview of Glenn Frey. Same thing with Elie Wiesel and Mike Wallace. So it was a privilege to do that show and to have the liberty, not only of half an hour each night, but if the guest was interesting enough, say, let's do a double. Will you come? I'd always say, will you come back tomorrow night? Person would say, sure. And then curiously, the next night we were wearing the same clothes. But it still seemed to work.
But yeah, and my thing with this, and I'm going to continue to name names, because Bill Murray and Chevy Chase,
right.
And these are all just right from that era where it's not the same. But did you have three? Did you ever? To me, they're biographies.
That's what they were. They were meant to be video biographies. And ideally, although because you have inventory, so sometimes you had to have somebody who just happened to be on a sitcom and it wouldn't necessarily go in a time capsule. But by and large, our operating principle was the person had to have a body of work. They had to have a body of work that was worth discussing.
And I think they respected you too, because I think that's part of the deal. When you're a good interviewer, Bill Murray starts to open up, and even Chevy. Everyone's seen Chevy on Johnny Carson. He's just not going to. And Paul McCartney's the one I think. To me, it's the one I love because you can watch it right now, and it's like you did it yesterday.
I'm so flattered that you remember all this.
Well, you too. But I watch these a lot, and what I think, Bob, me and you could do this together. We put these out on DVD. We make a little money, me and you.
You know what? People have said to me, why aren't these things better archived and more available? And I have no idea. I don't own them. I'm happy that I did them and that people remember them. At the time, to show you how different the world is, at the time that we did Paul McCartney, he had never done any American television interview in 10 years. This is before the explosion of, I guess Entertainment Tonight existed, but the Access Hollywoods and the extras and the inside editions didn't, and obviously the internet didn't, and all the social media didn't, and now just about everybody, there are exceptions, but just about everybody is pretty much available to one extent or another. But it was a big, big deal that Paul McCartney came on the show. And we recorded for an hour and used every second of it. So when you remove the commercials, that became 3 shows of later. And to hear him describe writing a song with John Lennon, and how, some songs, like for example, McCartney wrote Yesterday, but they were all by agreement Lennon-McCartney songs. And some songs John wrote, but others they collaborated on. And he's talking about them sitting around, and McCartney says, "It's getting better all the time." And Lennon says, by nature of his personality, "Can't get much worse." And then I can hear McCartney. I wish I could imitate his accent. Oh, yes. My God, you know better than I do. No. Get it down, get it down. But then to also hear him say, I said to him, there's a notion that you were the melody maker and John was the cultural voice. And while there may have been some truth in that, there was large overlap. And I listed some songs that were pretty gritty that Paul either had primarily written or written himself. And he said, I accept that. I understand that. But John and I had different lives. Neither of us grew up rich, but John had a really tough life with his dad and his mother and part of what gave John his greatness was that unhappiness. And in order to be greater, if I had to be more unhappy, I'll take the happier life. He said something like that. That's not exactly the quote, but it was like that. I'll take the happier life. And he was such a nice and accessible man that you don't forget stuff like that. And when they say that you're going to interview Paul McCartney, who they bring in through a separate service elevator, because after all, he's Paul McCartney. And he's listed, by the way, on the guest list as Rodney Dangerfield that night, which I also would have enjoyed, by the way. Sure. I did interview Rodney Dangerfield on HBO, but never on later. And you sit there at age 40 or 41 talking to Paul McCartney, but in your mind's eye, you're 11, sitting on the floor in your parents' living room watching the Beatles on a black and white TV on Ed Sullivan in 1964. And you're saying, wow, I wonder who that I went to high school with is watching this now, and what are they thinking? It's pretty cool.
Hope you enjoyed that look down memory lane. I have a few more memory lane type podcasts coming your way here on YouTube, plus more interviews with former Howard Stern folks. So I hope you're enjoying these. Again, pass them along. A lot of folks have said, maybe come on there. So fun names. I know you'll enjoy them if I can get them to say yes, and we'll hopefully get you some more interviews here. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and send these off to your friends. Make sure everyone knows what's going on over at ST Weekly. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.